Yeah. Aloha, Heidi and I welcome you to this, the inaugural session of our new Spring 2018 series of Conscious Aging. In this series, we have 13 shows planned and that will run more or less weekly until June, and we're excited about the guests we have lined up for them. All brought to you from Paradiso Integrale here in Umbria, Italy, by our website, thewisdomfactory.net.
Yeah, and to say where you find the previous series in the wisdomfactory.net and then /conscious-aging with e-info-page. There you find all the other series.
By the way, this is Heidi Hörnlein, and this is me, Mark Davenport, her partner and sometimes the foot dragger, as she's the one who plunges forward. But now she will plunge into explaining how best to watch the show.
Yeah, in case somebody is on YouTube instead of our website, please go to our website, the Wisdom Factory /live-streaming, and you will be directed to the page, the personal page of our guest of today, which is Dr. Oren Amitay.
Yes. DocAmitay, as he calls himself, is a registered psychologist, a university lecturer, and media consultant from, or in, I should say anyway, Toronto, Canada. And he has come into prominence partially because of his relationship with Dr. Jordan Peterson,
who we became addicted to watching.
Yeah. That's how we got to know him, yes. But today, he's here on his own, yes, and another errand to discuss the situation that more and more men are finding themselves in because of the changing roles of women in society in recent decades.
So you first say hello.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Yeah, and would you like to add something, because the introduction is a little bit shortish. So if you want to let people know a little bit more about you, please do that.
Well, I am a clinical psychologist, and so what we will be talking about today is based not simply on theory or academic research, but on the vast amounts of work that I do, working with between 15 and 30 patients per week. And I assess about 50 to 70 people per year in addition to that. So, and I read thousands, literally thousands of students' reflection papers every term or every year for all of my courses. And these are not just 19 or 18-year-old students, but I do a lot of continuing education classes. So these are people from all walks of life, different ages and so on. And so I get some really in-depth reflection papers on a part of their life, something that's important to them, a period of their life. And so to me, this type of information that I've been fortunate enough to receive is far more valuable than handing out a bunch of questionnaires with how much do you agree with this statement or that statement. It's qualitative. It's very qualitative, which is the best type of research. And so I just want people to know that's where this information is coming from, not just from a few studies.
I'm curious about that. Do you do that also online or only in Canada, in person?
It's only for my classes and for all the work that I do. Yeah.
Otherwise, if there was online, I would apply for a place, because I'm very much interested in psychology. I have done counseling, psychological counseling and coaching. So I would like to deepen a little more, but
right.
a part of that.
I know that my university, Ryerson, does offer online courses. And in the old days, online education was seen very negatively. Today, it's really essentially, depending on the institution, on par with, in-class learning with the technology and everything. So feel free to check out Ryerson. I don't teach any courses online. This is too much work for me. Or fly in for a class. I'll save a spot for you.
Okay. Sooner or later, I wanted to go to Toronto for Glenn Gould, the pianist, who I really liked a lot.
Too late.
Yep. So now let's go over to our questions.
Yeah, we wanted to ask you a couple things about, what is going on with men? What is the problem with men? Things have changed for them. And I think many men are pretty confused and even angry, maybe bitter even, about the spot they find themselves in.
In all ages.
Yeah, in all ages, but especially us old codgers who grew up with the old paradigm, and it doesn't work anymore. So what have you got to say to them? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And, here's the thing. So when we have a discussion like this, sadly, there are many people out there who are saying, oh, boo hoo, men have it so rough, and they say you're the most privileged people in society, in any society. So how dare you complain? You're just whining. And it's so unempathetic and it's not productive. So I think it's important to be able to have these discussions and to encourage men to reach out without judgment or without being judged, and to say, I'm struggling, or I'm confused, or I'm bitter. And, and that's so important, because as social animals, as creatures with these giant frontal lobes, we have the capacity to work out these issues. And, let's try to do that. Let's reason it through. Let's try to understand what's going on. So men at all ages, let's say males at all ages, including from childhood, really in the last couple of decades, are struggling with trying to understand, what does it mean to be a male, to be a good man? That's what's really important. The definitions have changed so much over the years, and none of this it's not a zero-sum game. None of this is to deny the struggles that women and girls have as well. But the fact is, people are having difficulty. So
it seems that for women it's okay to complain or to go out and look for help, while for men, they should know how to go on in life. We women expect that they know everything and that they are superior in many ways.
For us men, it's all personal failure. Yeah.
Right. Well, exactly. Yeah. Suck it up. Right. Whereas with women, their failures are due to men, due to the patriarchy. So it's very unbalanced.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so I'm glad that we're having this discussion. And, so I work with many different people of different ages, sexes, etc., and backgrounds. And so with older men, one thing, in the middle-aged men, before we get to the older men, let's look at the fact is, in Canada at least, middle-aged men comprise the largest group of suicides in Canada. Okay. And, and this was not always the case. And we're inferring that one of the reasons is that they feel sandwiched between trying to take care of their elderly parents, trying to take care of their current family, trying to be this person who has to, bear the brunt of all this. And again, not take away from the fact that women are the ones in families who usually have to do that. They are the ones who take care of all generations, and they have much more experience. But men financially are feeling the pressure to do this. That's the big thing. And they're expected to dress better, to look younger, to be, to be a certain way. And so they're having a hard time adjusting. So before we can even get into older age, there's that transition period where it's very confusing. So if they do make it into older age, as now we find many women feeling that they're not satisfied with their life. They may not have expressed it, or they did express it and their husband wasn't receptive to hearing it. And a lot of them are either literally leaving the relationship and, leaving the man to himself, or they're finding, which is a great thing, they're finding their own way. They want to find something that brings them meaning, purpose, satisfaction, all of which is very important, which we'll talk about today. But the man feels isolated because she's spreading her wings, she's growing, and he's feeling, kind of grounded and wondering, where does she go? And even though they're in a relationship, he feels isolated. So, this is part of the reason that many men in the older ages are struggling. Now, by the way, I can go on for 6 hours straight without taking a breath. So I will.
Yeah. Okay.
So I will pause each time. Maybe I'll pause now, and if there's, because I've got lots more to add, but maybe if you want to interject or add something, or
I wanted to ask, how come that, first of all, men are not so interested or have fear to go into the interiority? And the other thing, how come that women don't understand the dedication of men, which is expressed differently than we would expect? Because we actually expect that the man is a little bit like ourselves. We don't really understand men. and I mean, I talk about experience. He is my third husband. So, and the first time that I sort of understand what men are up to and how they feel and how they see the world in such, or live the world in such a different way, which I had never imagined. And I think many women are in the same situation, that we don't realize how much the men do for us, because they do it in the wrong way.
Right. Okay, so great questions. So to start, I'm very open about this. One of my greatest role models or heroes is my mother. I'm a mama's boy in many ways. I mean, only in later life. In earlier life, she made my life miserable. I made hers equally miserable. But now we both matured a bit. And so I praise the heck out of her all the time. So this is not some guy who's a woman-hating, chauvinistic person. I have 3 daughters. I have a wife, married 25 years this year. With 3 daughters of a very wide age range. So nothing I say is in any way meant to demean, belittle, or be divisive in any way toward anybody. So what you asked about, I feel, and I'm not the only person. Anything I say is not just my opinion. It's based on the writings or communications of others as well. But feminism, which I always saw my mother as a great model of it. I still call myself a male feminist to this day, because to me, feminism was what my mother embodied, which was simply, it wasn't political, it wasn't academic, it was simply, she saw it as equality. A woman could do what a man can do. It doesn't mean that we are the same types of people. There's equality in opportunity. We should have the equal rights, etc. But we are different types of people. Men and women are not the same. And sadly, over the past 30, 40, 50 years, the messages have been that no, these differences are not real. They're socially constructed. Men and women are pretty much the same, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Okay? But and I don't know how it is out in Europe, but I know I can only speak about the North American experience, right? Yeah. So here, so many people are trying to promote this myth. And again, I understand the ideal behind it. You want women to have equal opportunities and to be treated with equal rights, respect, and dignity. But we can have that while recognizing that we are different. And we fail to recognize that at the detriment of our well-being. So, for example, as you said, Heidi, if you assume that a man thinks the way that you do or should operate the way you do, you're going to be eternally disappointed, eternally frustrated.
Exactly. And I was.
Right. And so it's up to women. It's up to women and men to find out a healthier way of understanding each other, communicating with each other, and not trying to change the other person to fit who we think they should be. And in my therapy, my students and my patients all know this. I don't deal with wouldn't it be nice or I wish or why don't they. That's irrelevant to me. I deal with what is the real reality that we are dealing with. If your partner has certain tendencies, if your partner expresses things this way, we need to accept that this is the way they do it. However, if it's unhealthy, if it infringes on your rights, if it has a negative impact on you, you have the absolute right to tell that to them and try to get them to modify it so it doesn't have an impact on you, or maybe your family, depending on the circumstances, but just to try to force them to change because you think your way is better. That is a different situation. And that's why I try to help people understand, is to understand the difference between the two. You work within the parameters of the person, the way they operate and so on. But if their way of being and doing negatively affects you, then you need to work on a compromise. And in many cases, if the person can't change, I've helped very many patients. I shouldn't brag about this, but I've helped very many patients leave bad relationships. And they knew it was bad. 10, 20, 30 years they've been in horrific relationships and they just couldn't find the courage to leave. So I helped them find the courage and I helped them realize, A, you deserve to be treated better. B, you will be able to make it on your own. And C, this person is not the only person out there for you. Out of 7 billion people, there's a pretty good chance you're going to find somebody else.
Yeah, and you talk to the fear of women, if not doing it by them being able to survive by themselves, and they better stick to what we know. I think it's a very long, let's say, education from history that we were in this mindset, and it takes quite a bit of time to overcome that.
It really does. And and then there's the flip side where girls and young women are being taught, you don't need men. Okay, like they're disposable. They're just maybe you'll need them if you need sperm, but aside from that, you don't need them. And that strong message is being conveyed, and the problem with that is it's very divisive. You shouldn't ever feel beholden to a man. You shouldn't feel that you can't function without a man. But hey, if you want to be with someone, because we're social animals, we should not make you feel that you don't need somebody. We do need people. We don't want to be dependent on them. We don't want to be overly codependent, which is the extreme of dependence. We don't want to be that. We want to find someone that we can share our lives with. We can have mutual input into the relationship that satisfies both of us, because all the research shows two healthy people functioning together leads to far healthier mental health, physical health, financial health than one.
Yeah, I think it's overcompensation. It's like a pendulum, and sooner or later, hopefully, it will come to an halt. And I personally now, after all these years, and I must grant everybody younger to make their experiences, I think relationships are a good possibility to learn about oneself and figure all these things out. As you say, I did also therapies and then all these trainings, and come finally to the understanding of what you are talking about. That we need other people, and we need to find a way of understanding, and also let the other one be. It's still difficult,
Come on, spit it out, say it.
And we women have a history to want to change other people, And there is a saying which says the women want to change people, their men, and men fear that women change.
Right. Yes. And again, it's so important when we have these discussions. Too many people lack nuance. They're very black and white. So, what you just said is very important, that they think, okay, if we empower women, it will be at the cost of men. All right. Or if we empower men, it'll be at the detriment to women, versus, you know what? No, whatever helps one sex, if done properly, is going to help the other. Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to encourage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the older men, for them, it's probably even more difficult when they are, let alone the first phase pension, retirement.
Yeah. Oh.
No? And then you are alone, as he was. So what can you tell them?
Okay, well, the good news is, statistically speaking, if you're an older man, there are far more women out there than men. You've got a wider field. And I'm being serious about this. That's something to think about. The odds are in your favor. So if you just act moderately like a good person, you have a pretty good chance of, finding somebody. But what you said, which is, I think, the most important, and people, I don't know if people recognize this enough. When you talk about retirement, the image, the myth of retirement is that I'm going to live out my golden years, no more stress at work. I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to just live all and do all these great things I've always wanted to do. If someone thinks that way at a younger age, first of all, you're projecting into the future and not really paying attention to the present. You're not grounded in the present. And this is how you lead a fulfilling life, is you be grounded now, in the now. Second, when you get there, well, unless you've saved up a heck of a lot of money, you aren't doing all the great, wonderful things you want to do. You're stuck at this level of financial, financial level. And third, the most important thing, even if your job is not very nice, if you don't like it, it gives you purpose. It gives you value. It gives you structure. It gives you meaning. It gives you validation. And when you lose that, very many older men, women as well, but we're talking about men here, very many older men lose that sense of direction, of focus, of who they are at core. And it's a very hard transition. So I always tell men, look, if at the very least, start volunteering. Find a cause that, that speaks to you, that resonates with you. Volunteer. Maybe it's once a week. Maybe it's 3 times a week. Don't make it so you're getting up at 6 in the morning. You want to enjoy your life, but a couple of hours maybe each day. You have a schedule. You have a routine. Again, you're getting the interpersonal contact with other people, and you're getting the sense of value. My being is having a positive influence on somebody. That is so important. And because if you don't have that, you're walking around miserable, you feel low self-esteem. And if you're walking around and feeling that way, you're not attracting the women that you would like to have in your life because they see a shell of a man. So
that's advice. Advice.
We're getting a little echo here.
Oh, okay.
No, the problem. Let him stop.
Yeah. Yes, we've got 50 minutes left. Go ahead.
That 15 or 50?
50.
No, 40.
No, 40 actually.
40. Okay.
But I'm joking.
The echo is gone, so it's okay.
That's all right.
Is that okay? Great.
Yeah. No, it was interesting because as I was preparing for this conversation tonight, I realized that at age 50, when I lost a job as a drug and alcohol counselor, doing the changing rules and my particular institution's difficulties, I found myself looking for a job and nobody was looking for me,
Right.
And so I went through a period. I was actually rather newly married at that point, of looking for some other way to make a living. And the choices got worse and worse and worse. Because after 50, the ones that I aspired to just weren't available to me anymore. And my wife's expectations, she was a bit younger and she was still on her way up in her career. And I was not. It became very, very stressful. And eventually she did say enough is enough. And I took that, of course, as personal failure, not necessarily a socioeconomic crucible that I was in until quite recently, actually, But that's an old story. Men blame themselves for these things. It's typical, it seems.
Right. And we have to be careful. So there's this phenomenon called locus of control. And it's interesting because researchers, and I've read a lot of papers, and I used to tutor students, or I used to, at the university where I was working, I used to help give research and stats guidance to students doing their work. And a lot of times they were doing this locus of control phenomenon. And a lot of the people who talk about it fail to distinguish between 2 types of control. So the idea is, when, do you feel that internal locus of control, have control over your destiny or of how things, happen? Or do you attribute it externally, that, it's out of my hands, it's somebody else or circumstances beyond my control? And all the research says that internal locus of control is healthier. Okay, because then you're the master of your own destiny. You have a sense of self-efficacy, of self-agency, which I always promote with my patients and students. However, what they failed to distinguish was, if you have an internal locus of control for responsibility, good. If it's for blame, then you're doing what you're saying, which is, instead of recognizing the other circumstances, the other factors that could have contributed to your situation, you're taking all the blame onto yourself and all the guilt that comes along with it and the shame. And that's not healthy. So people got confused with that. And I was saying, no, I always tell people, take responsibility, take ownership, whatever it is, but it's got to be realistic. I can't take the blame for, let's say, for all white people. I can't feel guilty that Canada was built on the backs of, First Nations people, because it's not even my ancestors, because my mother and father immigrated here. But whatever the case may be, that kind of taking internal locus of control is not healthy. So that's what you did at that time. You failed to take a more gestalt or complete picture of what was going on, and you just attributed everything to yourself. And of course, that destroyed your self-esteem or sense of self-worth. So people really need to recognize that, but they have to be realistic, because if you go too far on the other end, then you're always blaming everybody and everything for your failures. You're never going to improve.
Yeah, or blaming the others or yourself. Seems to be
or as Peterson might say, the path between order and chaos.
Yeah, I know he loves it's funny because and I found myself using a lot of his sayings and his beliefs, well, mostly because we are very consistent in that. But you know, he says like, for him, chaos and order are like the most important you know, I guess constructs. To me, it's control, which is part of that, because when you're trying to gain like order comes from learning how to control your environment.
Yeah.
And it's not just your external environment, it's your internal environment, understanding yourself, being able to regulate your emotions, not allowing thoughts to, you know, to either be overly negative or too distorted, or, you know, to project into the future and get all anxious about that. That's control, internal and external. And so you cannot slay the dragon. You cannot bring order to chaos unless you've learned to control that. And I'm not talking about unhealthy control. You're not trying to control other people, but a moderate, healthy level of control. And by the way, before I forget, I want to just list 6 things. I think people would do themselves a great service if they go onto Google and they look at something called positive psychology. It's been around the last 20-something years. Martin Seligman was the founder of it. So positive psychology. People might look at this and start going, oh, this is so hippy dippy. This is peace and love. But there's research behind it. And so Martin Seligman, who's also famous for what was called the learned helplessness theory of depression, he came up with his positive psychology with some other people as well. And there are 6 virtues, 6 basic virtues that people should strive to satisfy or to aspire to. If you can live your life trying to satisfy these 6 virtues or live in accord with them, you're pretty much guaranteed a better life, regardless of your circumstances. So I'm just going to read the 6, and people can Google this and learn more, because each of these 6 virtues have extra strengths underneath them, and there's like 24 strengths that go along with them. So one is wisdom and knowledge. Okay. And I think the most important wisdom you can ever gain or knowledge is about yourself. Learn to introspect. Gain insight into yourself. Be honest. Look at your flaws, you know, and recognize that there's nothing wrong with that. You are a deeply flawed human being, just like everybody else. And if you can embrace that instead of denying those aspects of yourself, you will function much better. So wisdom and knowledge, but not just about yourself, but about others. But that's part. Courage, which seems to be lacking these days. And that was always an attribute of men. Men should always have courage. That's such an important strength. Third is humanity and love, being kind, being generous, you know, and that's what we were talking about, trying to find a partner. Fourth is justice. And sadly, I'll tell you right now, one of the reasons, at least in the Western, you know, in North America, one of the reasons so many young people are failing, so many young people feel distressed, is that they've been fed a lie. They've been taught from a young age. And I know this because I tweet about this and people send me so much information. From a very young age, children are being taught to be social justice warriors. Okay. And they are too young to fully understand this. The ideals of social justice are, I think, something to aspire to. They are very good things. You try to have fairness. You try to have equality of opportunity. Let's not have racism or homophobia or transphobia. Like, those are all good things. But what they're teaching children to do is to fight against these mythical bad guys, the patriarchy, okay, whiteness, you know, able-bodied people, like anyone that has any, you know, privilege. So kids are being taught these are bad things, number one, and especially if they belong to that category, they're feeling like they're guilty. Okay. Number two, if they don't belong to these categories, they say they are the enemy. These are the people who are, you know, keeping me down. It's not my laziness. It's not my background. It's not my lack of effort or anything. It's just, it's them. So we're externalizing any responsibility. And three, the social justice warriors, the SJWs, they are fighting what they think is for battle, you know, for justice. But what they're really doing is they're fighting an unwinnable war. In the meantime, their own lives are going to hell. And they are not recognizing, because they're getting so caught up in their own self-righteous, battles. They don't understand the difference between righteous and self-righteous. That's my catchphrase, okay? Big difference. A lot of these people don't get that. So they're they think that what they're doing is righteous, that they ignore all the flaws in themselves, all the relationships that they are ruining, how much they're not doing in their lives, okay, because they're fighting for justice. So
and very unjust. They disseminating not justice, injustice, because they are making a clear difference between one and the other, and say this one is it's not to be considered and this one is right. And so they immediately, I would say, they are everything what they fight against. Racism, sexism, as everything they are embodying by believing to fight for it. But
right, this lack of insight into what they're doing allows them to be so hypocritical, and allows them to do the opposite of wisdom and the opposite of justice. They're projecting their own terrible thoughts and behaviors onto everybody else, and they don't see it.
Exactly. This is, it's really, for me, it's so, how can a society handle that when they don't stand up in time, you know? Then I'm writing a blog post now about that, because I'm German, you know, and I grew up very near to East Germany. I know where this leads to. I was there several times, and I found out how life is when so-called social justice is reality. So it's really, for me, it's...
No, exactly. And just so you know, my mother's half German, and she's also Polish, and her mother was in Auschwitz. Most of her family were wiped out by the Holocaust. So we know where these things go. And these young people are just obliterating history and replacing with fantasy and delusions of grandeur. And this is narcissism. And I'm not diagnosing people, but it is a type of narcissism. And that's what narcissists do. They have no insight, they have no emotional intelligence, and they project all of their garbage onto everybody else. So that's my justice. That's the fourth point. And
I still want to go there. How can we? Since I read Eric Byrne time ago about the games people play, I try to find out a rule in the game where you can stop it. And most games don't have this rule. So I'm asking myself, how can we get out of this game which is being played now? I mean, you and Jordan, you are big examples to stand up and try to interrupt the game, you know. Right. Normal people were always thinking, don't make much fuss about it. Yeah, it's not so important. Let them be. But this is so dangerous.
It is very dangerous.
My opinion. So I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, it is very dangerous. And the way to fight it is going back to the second. Actually, all the traits that are the virtues I mentioned. You have the wisdom and knowledge to know what's going on, because many people don't appreciate what's going on. You have the courage to stick up or to fight for it, to take the risk, reasonable risks. You have humanity and love, because the fact is, by standing up to it, you are showing love and generosity and kindness to all of society, including these brainwashed children.
Absolutely.
Okay? Right? And you try to bring justice to all of the injustices that these people are bringing. And, you know, when I gave my talk with Jordan Peterson on November 11th last year, the biggest free speech talk in Canada, my whole talk was about what the average person can do. And I was showing them step by step by step, interpersonally and on social media. How do you fight when you feel powerless, when you feel that there's nothing you can do? There are things you can do. So that I'm a big fan of a true empowerment. I want people to feel that they can get involved and they can do what they need to do, either for themselves, preferably for others as well. So people have to stand up, and they have to educate themselves. Educate yourselves. Yeah. And here's the trick. See, the thing is, the ideals that these SJWs or far liberals, far lefties are espousing are things that we should support in theory, as I said earlier, about kindness, fairness, etc. So people think, well, how can I fight against this? Because then I'm a bad person and I'll be called a Nazi, which I've been called. I have been called publicly, you know, as a grandson of a Holocaust survivor, an Auschwitz survivor. You know, I've had that. So people are so afraid of that. So educate yourselves and be, and I tell people, look, I might have a voice now. I didn't have much of a voice before. Jordan Peterson didn't have much of a voice before. He may be in the stratosphere Others are really high. I'm still so low, yet I keep fighting. I have no job security. I don't have any tenure or anything like that. I could have my college sanction me at any time. I've had people threaten me many times to be sanctioned. And I believe in justice and I fight for it. And, find other people who are like-minded, even if it's one or two more people, and then build from there, get the numbers, get the strength, because this gives you a sense of purpose and value. And even if you're an older person, I don't care what age you are, especially if you're an older person, you bring your wisdom and your lived experience to the fore. And they're going to say to you, yeah, but you're just, right? For sure. But
I'm interrupting, I guess. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to say, especially if you're an older person and you don't have to fight for a job anymore because you have even if it's little, but you can survive from the pension. You have all the freedom to do that. And that's a little bit what is motivating us, to do what we do is everything for free. But we want to motivate people to hear something else, let's say, than they normally hear. And we're very grateful that you are here to talk with us.
Well, since your 6 points have been interrupted.
All right, I'll get to my last two.
Yeah, we got two left.
Okay.
I have a friend who I respect deeply, who has noticed, the expansion of older people as a percentage of the population, which is something new in the history of the world. People didn't live that long. In my parents' generation, I would have been the oldest one in the room already, and so there's a whole class of people who have a perspective. They may not all be wise, but they all have a point of view and an experience, that was not available earlier. And there's something that will change the society just because these extra voices are now added and are available.
And they speak.
If they speak. Yeah, I speak. Yeah.
Let him continue with the 6.
Well, but let me talk. Before I continue, I'm going to tie in what you just said with those virtues. So what I was going to say was, historically, elderly people were assumed to have had the life experience and the wisdom. People listened to them. And sadly, in many people today, they're being taught the opposite, because the older people are the architects of the destruction of the world. You are what's wrong in the world. So if someone, so getting back to the sense of meaning and purpose, if somebody can, an older person can talk to children, to their grandchildren or something like that, not in a way, not saying, hey, your mom's crazy, don't listen to her, here's the reality, okay? Not in that way, but in a way that does show children a different perspective. And to earn that respect, in the old days, it was just granted to older people. Now you got to earn it. I tell everybody, you fight to earn that respect. I don't believe in disrespect, but I believe in treating everyone fairly. But to get that respect, show the person, that you deserve it, and make them listen, or try to get them to listen to your perspective. But it has to be done in a clever way that's going to be able to circumvent all the barriers that have been put up by their educators. But whether it's a university professor, SJW university professor, or whether it's a kindergarten teacher who is being told, you have to teach children this is reality, even if it's not. Okay, so never give up the fight. And I always tell people, forget about trying to change the world. I mean, Jordan Peterson's famous line of clean your own damn room is good. And I say, yeah, if you can influence one or two people in your immediate environment, if you can have a positive impact on them, that is where change occurs. And that's where you get a sense of purpose and validation. So that's what people can do rather than trying to change the world.
Absolutely.
So that leads to 2 more points, 2 more virtues. The 5th one, I'll admit this is a bit harder for me. It's called temperance. Okay. So temperance.
What does that mean?
So it's
okay.
So it's self-control, prudence, discretion and caution, and humility and modesty. Okay. So I was raised, given my background, given my parents, both of my parents, they did not let society tell them how to live life. They operated under their own, belief systems, and they fought against what they saw as wrong. They fought for social justice, and they fought for their own cause. And so I was raised that way. So I'll admit, prudence, caution, discretion, not exactly my thing. I've had to learn to do that. But the self-control is, and I help so many people to like my patients and students to learn that self-control. So I will do things that might seem ridiculous, crazy, dangerous, or whatever else, but it's never out of control. It's a choice I make. I know my limits and I know what I'm doing. And I help people. I say, if you're getting into a tense exchange with somebody, whether it's online, whether it's face to face, whether someone's screaming at you, I teach them just to breathe. Okay, breathe through the diaphragm, not the way you normally breathe. You breathe the opposite the way you want to breathe. People should Google diaphragmatic breathing. Okay.
Or take a lesson with me, because I'm also a classical singer and I teach that.
Yes. It's yoga, meditation, singing, and acting. I always say those are the people who have that ability. It's so important, and it grounds you, keeps you level-headed. You don't feel fear. You might feel some fear, but it doesn't escalate out of control, and that will help you make the right decisions. And I tell people, you might want to fight back at somebody, but when someone's coming at you and you're just calm, that really throws them off. They don't know what to do with that. So that's what I've mastered. The breathing and the self-control. The other stuff, it's a bit harder. So that's the fifth one. And the sixth one, I think this is, especially for older people, this is what you need to embrace, which is transcendence. Now that sounds pretty abstract, but let me just quickly read about it. Okay, I'll read it quickly. Lists of what the subcategories under transcendence. Number one, gratitude. Now, I have a spiritual guide. He's being accepted into First Nations people in Canada. He's white. He's not Native himself, but he's been accepted. He's becoming a medicine man amongst First Nations people. That's quite special. He is my spiritual guide. He was a former student of mine. He calls me his mentor in therapy aspects. He's my mentor when it comes to spirituality. And so he has attained, or he's on the path to attaining, a sense of gratitude where when he wakes up, he's grateful for the breath he breathes. Like, wow. I don't know if I'll ever get to that, but I've learned true gratitude. And the science behind this is why I tell people, most people learn gratitude as a child where it's kind of it's for other people. Like, you should be more grateful to your aunt because she gave you a $10 check or something. It's not about that. I tell people gratitude is self-serving, because when you're grateful, when you're in a state of true gratitude, not just saying it, but when you embrace it, no negative emotions. Studies have shown this. You cannot feel anger, fear, resentment, bitterness, jealousy. You don't feel that. You're in the state of bliss. It might be 5 seconds, it might be 5 minutes, but it's such a beautiful place to be. And so when things are going bad, when things just seem like, that you have no control over something, if you can find something, and again, it's not just to say it. It starts off just saying it. I'm grateful I have a roof over my head. I'm grateful I have this person in my life. And it means nothing at first. It doesn't resonate, but the more you say it and the more you embrace it, there will be a change in your physiology, your neurology, your emotional and psychological experience will change if you can embrace gratitude. So to me, that's the number one thing I've learned over the last few years to accept. So gratitude. Then there's appreciation of beauty. That's nice. That helps as well. There's hope and optimism, thinking positive about the future, spirituality, a sense of purpose. As I was saying earlier, you need to have a sense of purpose. They say forgiveness and mercy. I have a harder time with that, quite frankly. I'll be honest. Okay. Zest, passion, enthusiasm. And then lastly, playfulness and humor. All of these.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm learning that. As a good German, we were always like,
Right.
It's been rough, let me tell you.
Well, you're cracking or you're breaking her. That's good. She's,
Yeah, he's cracked me, really.
Oh, well. On those subcategories of the last virtue, I think we have a kind of scattered performance. Some more, some less.
Yeah.
But the
Now, I
point
wanted
is
to
clear.
say to the transcendence, we have one of the episodes in March, which is called Gero Transcendence, where we talk about that transcendence.
Gero, okay.
Gero,
Not
no,
zero.
no, Gero. For older people, sort of naturally, it is more easy to transcend things and to develop these qualities, because a young person, we take everything for granted.
Right.
If we don't get in, often that was the grandparents, they were able to transmit gratitude, but today we don't have grandparents. And if it's so self-centered, why should I be grateful that I'm here? It should be better. This doesn't work and this doesn't work. And this is very German, by the way. He has his problem with me every now and then. But I wanted to say we want to talk about that, and how spirituality comes also more natural, the desire for spirituality when we get older.
Right. Yep. And well, although very many young people would love to say I'm spiritual, and it drives me crazy when they just throw these words around, okay? Or I'm Buddhist or something. Like, don't just use talk. Embrace it, truly understand it. And however, when you say it's easier for older people to embrace these sub-traits or subcategories, that's only if they've had a relatively healthy development, or if they make a concerted effort. If they haven't had a great life up until that point, if they don't feel they've met milestones they've wanted to meet, sense of purpose and so on, then they have to make a concerted effort to embrace these concepts. They don't come naturally to many people. And Erik Erikson wrote about this 50 or 60 years ago, about the 8 stages of life. And the last stage, if you haven't kind of mastered the other stages, or last few stages, it's very terrifying, because the person's looking forward saying, I don't have much behind me. They don't feel they have much behind them to kind of carry them healthily into the unknown, right? So, it doesn't come naturally. It takes effort, and people have to recognize that.
Yeah, I think what you are saying now, it depends very much on the mindset.
Right.
If you are organized like I'm tendentially am to be a perfectionist, so whatever you reach seems to be not good enough. And so you didn't really reach anything, because other people say, oh, what you did, and that's nothing. So if we don't succeed to change this mindset in appreciation of what we really did, and what we could bring into the world, then it will happen what you say. Even if we have done a whole lot, it's not valid, if we have this inner how do you say? Yeah, this belief system.
Yeah, and look, perfectionism. This is a part of my research that I did many years ago. I looked at self-criticism as a personality trait, and self-criticism was the #1 personality trait that predicted depression, because we didn't know what part it was. It was exactly perfectionism within self-criticism that is so damaging, because for the way that you said it, how can you be satisfied or happy or joyful if you're always striving for something better, because it's never perfect and perfection doesn't exist, right? So, and the thing about comparing self to others, what you just said, here's the thing. And this is where older people have the advantage over younger people. Younger people have been raised with social media, smartphones, they're always externalizing everything. They're not reflecting. When in the old days, when we were waiting for a bus, or before we went to bed, we would sit, we would think, we would reflect, we would introspect. Young people don't do that anymore. As soon as they have spare time, smartphone. Okay, and so A, they're not learning to introspect. Okay, and B, B, because they're always looking outward, and with social media, they are seeing millions of people who supposedly are their peers. They're not models, they're not famous rich actors or whatever. They are their peers who are living lives that they think they should be living. They're going on ski vacations every 2 weeks. They've got the perfect body. They have this and that. And again, They tell themselves, these are my peers. Why can't I have that? And I've got to tell you that at any age, it doesn't matter. But as I said, younger people are now more susceptible to it. At any age, this upward social comparison, what we call it, comparing yourself to people above you, it crushes you. It leads to depression, distress, anxiety, despair. And it's so unhealthy. So I always help people try to compare themselves to themselves. Where was I before? What am I doing? What is important to me? I mean, just so you know, I drive a very typical car. I used to drive a Toyota Corolla before, a gray Toyota Corolla, the most boring low-level car you can imagine, but it was very reliable, darn it. Okay. And people are saying with the money that you make, you should be driving a much, much more expensive car. And that wasn't relevant to me. I grew up in poverty. We didn't have money. My sense of self or worth was never contingent on how much money I made. So when I make a lot of money, it's not about that. It's like, I feel great because I can provide for my family. That's all I care about. And, if I made less money, but I was still providing for my family and I was still driving just a very standard normal car, living in a modest house, I'd be perfectly happy. So I try to get people to find what would truly make them happy. What brings, and happiness, by the way, is not the goal. The goal is purpose and meaning. If you find that purpose, meaning, and self-value, the happiness comes naturally. And that's what I try to help people to develop at all ages. And it's especially important as you get older, because once again, you're losing the automatic purpose and value, which is jobs. You need to find ways to replace that in ways that make you feel still satisfied.
Yeah, some people find it as grandparents.
Well, it took me years, about 15.
We have echo. We have him.
We do.
We need him to talk.
Yeah.
No, please. I missed that part though because of the echo.
Well, I said it took me about 15 years to make that transition.
Right.
But it happened. It can be done. And I'm looking forward to, 25, 30 more here in progress anyway.
Yeah, and to the knowledge that it never ends, the development.
Never.
That we have always the chance to go on to work on other little shadow things or big shadow things which are still to be worked on. And that, for me, this was possible, this work I understood it about 20 years ago, when I understood that it was not only for me, but when I'm better off and I understand more that I can help other people too. Because before it was considered egocentric if you do something for yourself. And who do you think you are, So.
Right. And you know what? I tell everybody, it all boils down to perspective. Everything we talk about as humans, because we're the only creatures on the planet who can change our perspective. We can have 10 different people look at the exact same situation and get 10 different perspectives. It's very subjective. So I help people find a healthy, doesn't have to be a positive perspective, but a healthy perspective. Because if you're in a bad situation and you deny it, and if your job is at risk and you're saying, no, it's fine, nothing's going to happen, everything's great, you're the one who gets the axe, right? So you can have a negative perspective as long as it's grounded in reality, and as long as you don't just resign yourself to it, you accept the reality. There's a difference between acceptance and resignation. Resignation, you go, this is my fate, there's nothing I can do about it. Acceptance is, this is the reality, the real reality I am in, and I've got to learn to operate within these parameters, find the best way around that. So it's about perspective. And when you said, for example, about this lifelong journey, this is what I tell people all the time. And with older people, yes, let's be practical. The reality is the journey is shorter. The time pressure is more intense. But still, people put these artificial timelines on themselves. By this point, I must do this, this, and this. I say, in many cases, that's just, you've made it up. It's arbitrary. Why would you believe that, right? That's back to perspective. So I say, as long as you see this as, if you have one loss, it's not game over. That's just one loss in a long, game. And at the end, you want the way to win the game is to learn, to grow, to develop. And as you said, the research shows this. When you give to others or give of yourself, as long as it's not sacrificing yourself, as long as you don't become a martyr, because we know how that turns out, as long as
the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
but of
go ahead.
yourself gives you so much. It helps you on all levels. And I tell my patients, I say, look, as humans, we are self-interested. We can call it selfish. We can call it self-serving. I like self-interested. It's the most neutral. We can't deny that. And look, the most famous thing is when you're in an airplane. What does the flight attendants tell you? In an emergency, take care of yourself first. Get that oxygen mask for yourself, then help others. And so what you're saying, you're right. People say, oh, it's egocentric to work on yourself, or no. If you do that with the goal of hoping to be able to be a better person to the people around you, then it's not egocentric. It's practical. It makes sense.
Absolutely.
I don't have a goal in my life. I'm finding that life will lead me places I could not have expected, could not have foreseen. And I'm reminded, some wise person told me, that up until our last breath, there's creativity, there's novelty, there's something that wasn't there before. It's brand new all the way. Yeah.
Right. And one way that and this is controversial, so I have to be careful in my wording. And I don't know, each country has different rules about this, but there's more and more research, at least in North America right now, looking at the effects of psilocybin or mushrooms, LSD, MDMA or ecstasy, ketamine. Ketamine, I have a little bit of an issue with, but for these other hallucinogens and helping people with coming to terms with their own mortality, their place in the universe, this creativity, seeing a different perspective, whether ayahuasca, DMT, or other medicines. They're plants. They're plant-based medicines that have been around forever, and it's only political, I don't know, interference that is preventing us from exploring more. But now, at least in North America, more studies are being funded and are being approved to look at this. And I was at a talk, I think last month or the month before, and it was just beautiful seeing people taking mushrooms. It was only like once or twice. Well, not the mushroom themselves, but the psilocybin within the mushrooms, the active ingredient. And it changed their perspective, and there was no more fear. They looked forward to, as you're saying, the unknown. They didn't fear the unknown. They embraced it. And that's what we need to do. And even if the unknown is learning a new dance, or going out or trying something you've never done, embrace it. Don't fear that. That's how you grow as a person. Be open-minded and try new experiences. As you're absolutely right, Mark. The novelty factor. As children, we seek it. We love novelty and we're little children, and we should never lose that wonder of trying to learn something new or find something new. You froze. We seem frozen, so I'm not sure if you're hearing me. I cannot hear you at all. I'm trying to reach out to you in different ways, through the chat message and through Facebook Messenger. I will stay on until we figure this out. It says you left the chat period. I am still on, but I muted my camera. I do not know if you got the last part of my speech period. Should I log off? Question mark. I'm not sure how this will work out because unfortunately we got disconnected. But if this does get broadcast, I want to say thank you very much for having me on. And I hope people understand I didn't come by the way I see the world naturally. I was much more negative, pessimistic, didn't have that much faith in humanity. And, I had to work hard to learn some of these things, not just through my clinical practice and through the other factors I mentioned, but through my own experience and through having an open-mindedness to want to learn, to want to see different ways of doing things and to try to be a better person. Because in the end, it will benefit me as well if I am happier. But again, happiness is not my main goal. Happiness is the byproduct of feeling satisfied, of feeling that I'm doing some good for myself, for my family, and for others. And that's something that I didn't always believe in. It used to always be very, very self-centered. Once I had children, it changed my perspective.